Hello, students. My name is Luis Velasquez, and one of the most important health concerns that I will be talking about today is suicide. Now, what is suicide? Of course, everybody is aware of what suicide is, but according to the CDC, suicide is death caused by injuring oneself with the intent to die. What is even more troubling about suicide is that it is one of the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States. Now, for the sake of this presentation, I'll only be covering statistics in the US, not worldwide. So why is it important to public health? See, first, what is the holy grail of public health? What is the mantra of public health? The answer is to prevent, to promote, and most importantly, to protect populations from diseases or injuries. That is their main objective, their overall mission. Their main task is to educate the masses on symptoms of diseases or illnesses, what are the possible signs that equate to these injuries, communicating prevention strategies to ensure that people are aware. Key word, aware of this health concern. Of course, suicide is a serious concern for public health because individuals are in a place where they want to end their suffering or their mental illnesses are negatively impacting their health in some way. Something is going on that is making these people think such horrible thoughts when life is extremely precious. There's that old saying of you only live once. You gotta make it count. So, excuse me. There are three stages to suicide that people must be aware of. So the first stage we'll be talking about is what's called suicidal ideation. This is where individuals will start contemplating suicide, having such dark thoughts about ending their lives. Now there are two variations to suicidal ideation, and that's passive and active ideation. Passive is when, say for example, people will say, "Oh, I wish I was dead. That was incredibly embarrassing, this or that, etc., etc." Something like that where they'll say it nonchalantly, but they don't really mean it. Now, active, however, is when they're thinking about it, possibly planning how they will commit suicide, and actually have the intention of really ending their own lives. This is where the individual will pose a great risk to themselves because if their active ideation goes far, then they will enter what we call stage 2 of suicide, and that's the planning stage. Now, this stage is where most of these individuals' thoughts will turn to concrete planning. They will spend a tremendous amount of time fighting with themselves whether they want to commit suicide or not. Here is where the individual will become incredibly reserved, pure isolation. This stage is truly textbook definition of life or death situation. Because this is their essence of life we are talking about, it is one of those decisions that will really impact you and others in your life. If they decide to choose life, it is important for them to seek help immediately to minimize further injury to themselves. Now, unfortunately, if the individual chooses death, then they're on the last and most dangerous stage of suicide, and it's called autopilot. Incredibly dangerous. The individual, after spending X amount of time alone, fighting with their thoughts on life or death, they are set on really committing suicide. The difficulty with this stage is that most people and health professionals find it difficult to detect this red flag behavior. What happens is once the individual is set on ending their own lives, their behavior will make a 180-degree change. They'll be happier and calmer. That is because once they commit suicide, once they know they're set on actually doing it, their suffering will be no more. And many people fail to realize that seeing this behavior, they'll think, oh, they're finally healed. They're not depressed anymore, or their mental illness didn't overtake them. See, that is the issue right there. This is a 50-50 chance that they actually don't want to commit suicide and do want to seek help, or they're just calm and are ready to end their suffering. What people need to understand is that if they suspect that after X amount of time they were feeling sad or depressed and suddenly there's a huge shift in their behavior, strict intervention and observation is needed to ensure that they won't commit suicide. And if they really need help, they'll know that they're not alone and there are resources and guidance. So, who is at most risk of suicide? Teens and young adults are considered high-risk demographics for suicide. It is the second leading cause of death for ages 15 and 24. In 2019, this is the information on the right-hand side, there were about 1.38 million suicide attempts. And out of that number, roughly 47,511 Americans actually committed suicide. What is even more alarming is that white males account for 69.38% of suicidal deaths, and 50.39% of suicide were from firearms. I'm assuming with firearms it's just one painless shot, hence the alarming percentage. Now on the left-hand side, this information comes from 2017. 47,000 people died from suicide, equivalent to one death every 11 minutes. What's even more alarming is that 10 million people were having thoughts of suicide. 3 million of them planned for suicide, and 1 million attempted suicide. Unfortunately, I guess the picture doesn't really specify how many people actually did die as a result from their suicide attempt. But we can somewhat compare this information to the 2019 one, and some of the numbers are at similar ranges, either increased or decreased. So suicide is a somewhat fluctuating concern in the United States. Almost 95% of suicides have psychological disorders. So 95% of those, mental illnesses most likely played a role in their suicide. Females, however, are 2 times more likely to think about suicide versus males, and their preferred method is drug overdose or self-inflicted injury, such as cutting themselves. Males, however, are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than females, and they prefer more lethal methods such as using firearms. Now, if we look at the CDC graph, top one, this is a graph of the female age range of deaths from suicide. Between 1999 to 2019, those numbers increased, and it shows us that adults and elders are more likely to die from suicide than younger people. The bottom graph is for males, and we can see just how different males are to females in terms of suicide, and that is men are more likely to commit suicide than females. One thing public health must be concerned with is that high schoolers are more likely to commit suicide than college students. The reasoning behind why high schoolers are high risk is because they're at a point in life where they must make a decision of who they are individually. What kind of career do they want? Bills, responsibilities to take care of, etc., etc. This is where stress is incredibly high for these young adults, and they find ways to cope the stress through drug abuse and other nefarious methods. So let's talk about the levels of prevention for suicide. Primary prevention is enforced to prevent disease and injury before it occurs. This is where we educate the masses on suicide prevention, teach them the suicidal warnings, and pay attention if their children or someone they know are exhibiting these red flag behaviors. Secondary prevention is enforced to reduce the impact of disease or injury after occurrence. Now, this is where intervention is required when there are individuals in stage 1 and or stage 2 of suicide. They're thinking about it but haven't really committed to ending their lives yet. This is where counseling is recommended to teach and help these individuals understand how suicide can affect themselves and those around you. These are targeted for more short-term effects of suicide. Tertiary prevention is enforced to lower the impact of disease or injury after occurrence. This is where intervention is required after the individual attempted suicide but survived. Therapy and medication is highly recommended to ensure the victim gets the help they need and to educate them on the long-term effects of suicide. Now, one final message before I end this presentation. If you or someone you know are showing possible signs of suicide, do not, I repeat, do not hesitate to seek help. There will always, always, always be resources available 24/7 for those that need assistance. Do not be a bystander. Always reach out and let those who are suffering know that they are not alone. The phone number is 1-800-273-8255. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.